Are you rolling, as they say?
Can I hold that for you?
No, just a couple of little notes to myself that I thought sometimes I would forget when you asked me, like who did what and when and where. So, but
Okay.
does this show up?
No, but we can hear it.
Oh, you hear it. I won't. Okay, don't rustle it.
Yeah.
Especially when you start asking questions about who sang what.
Don't worry about that. There's no trick questions.
No trick questions. I don't get a chance to look at the questions beforehand, do I?
Nope.
I can mark them off. I said that to a friend of mine. They said to me, "What do you think you are, Tom Cruise?"
So you really are a member of SAG?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You speak like an actor. I mean.
Yes. Well, I spent 12 years on Broadway before I ever gotten started with going into the club business.
I just did a series on the history of Broadway for PBS.
No kidding.
Did you see it? Broadway, the American Musical?
Yes. You did that?
Uh-huh.
That was wonderful.
Yep.
Yeah. Was it in 2 parts or?
6.
It was in 6 parts. Yes, it was very reminiscent of a lot of things that I was in. I was on Broadway since my first show was Goldilocks with Elaine Stritch and Donna Michi.
Oh, wow.
And that was brought back to the what was it called, the theater, I forget, the Lundfontein Theater. When it reopened, it had a huge, it was closed for quite a while, and had a in the 1950s it was closed, and then they renovated it.
Well, now I sort of became interested in other forms of musical theater now, so that's what brings us to the same. Meet, are we almost ready?
Yeah, we're good right now.
Okay. So Stonewall. Let's start at Stonewall. What did it make possible in terms of gay social life?
I think it opened the doors to the gay world. Prior to that, everything was in the closet. We were all in the closet. The Stonewall was basically a shock to our system, probably adrenaline too. Because when I heard that this was going on, I couldn't stay at home and listen to it on the news. I had to run out and run up to Sheridan Square and see what was going on. Sure enough, it was quite a scene. I had some friends, later in years past, I had friends that were actually inside. But other than the fact that when Stonewall started, it was the first time that it came out in the open to a lot of people. People didn't realize that the gay world actually existed. I think this became a national issue too.
Tell me about the gay world in New York, the boys in the band, that sort of era. What was life like for gay men then?
It was very sophisticated, and you would dress for dinner. You'd have dinner parties. I think the gay world had a lot of manners, which it doesn't have anymore. I mean, everything is so casual today. But we used to have evenings where you'd plan dinner parties and you'd have your friends over. There wasn't the club scene as it is today. You had to go out and you had to make your way in the gay world because it was such a society. And in fact, I remember thinking that there used to be an East Side society and a West Side society, a village society. And very seldom did the three mix, except on a Saturday night in someone's apartment when you'd give parties.
And tell me about the early days when gay men started being able to dance all night long, and what was it? I mean,
well,
people talk about it. It's like, wow, there's this new thing to do.
Yeah, the idea of going out and going to a club and being able to take your shirt off was unheard of. And one of my first clubs, it stayed open till 6 o'clock in the morning, and that was like, wow, it's open till 6 a.m. Who's going to stay up that late? Huh? 6 o'clock, then it became 7 o'clock, then it became 8 o'clock, then 9 o'clock. By 10 o'clock, I said, that's enough. 10 o'clock, you guys got to go home. So that was during the Flamingo days. But in the earlier days, in the very early 70s, I was involved with a place that I call the Ice Palace out at Cherry Grove, Fire Island. And when I opened that, you couldn't dance. Two boys couldn't dance together. You had to have a woman with you. There would be 2 guys and 1 woman, and that would be allowed on the dance floor. And the police would make sure that you had a guard there watching you. So you couldn't have a whole dance floor filled with men. So we've come a long ways.
Do you remember when that changed and what?
I think it changed in that year was 1970. The law, of course, it changed nationally in Washington. It was discrimination, so Albany had to do something about it. And eventually we got out to Suffolk County, and the local police were told, oh, you can't do that anymore. So they used to arrest you for two guys dancing together would be arrested. It was considered a crime. So that part of history, has been washed under the rug now. So it almost sounds ridiculous to think that two guys dancing together would be a crime. But it was the fact.
I watched the film The Boys the Band, and there's a scene where they dance together after this dinner party.
Yeah.
And I'm like, how did we get from there to the Flamingo and the Saint? It's 10 years, 11 years later.
Well, I think that it all started really at Fire Island. And during the years of 1970 to 74, I had an opportunity to change a lot of things, especially the clothes ethic, because everyone would dress up, and then all of a sudden here comes the guy who owns the Ice Palace now, and I'm dressed in dungarees. So that changed that whole thing. And on Saturday nights, by 1971, out at the Ice Palace, you were dancing without your shirt on. So when I opened Flamingo, that crowd came right into the city and into Flamingo, and Flamingo became the club to belong to or to try to get into.
So Flamingo was, when did you open Flamingo?
74.
74.
Mm-hmm.
So what happened? There was a couple other clubs in New York, the 10th floor.
The 10th floor was a nice small club in the early 70s. It started around 71 or 72. And you actually had to walk up 10 flights of stairs because it was on the 10th floor. The elevator never worked. It was a small little loft. And the membership that I had, a lot of it was at the 10th floor. And that was the same people that I knew from Fire Island. So see, all the clubs would close. We'd close for the summer. And everyone would go to Fire Island. So we'd be closed for June, July, and August and reopen in the middle of September.
At Flamingo?
At Flamingo, yes.
So when you decided to open Flamingo, what was your vision? What were you thinking? What was going to be new about it?
Well, I don't know if there was anything. I don't think I set out to try to make something new. I created the Ice Palace at Cherry Grove out of a place called the Boom Boom Room. And it was called the Boom Boom Room because it had a great big jukebox, and all the neighbors, that's all they could hear was boom boom all night long. So it became the Boom Boom Room. So when I took it over, I said, I can't have this. And I said, I wanted a club. And I was very influenced by my Cuban friends, especially, who are all into music. And so the idea was, let's change this into a discotheque. So I ran down to Canal Street and bought tons of tinfoil, went back out to Fire Island, stapled it all to the walls, went out and rented sound system. Now, it was very difficult to find a decent sound system. So we rented that and rented turntables. And there was a book at the time called The Ice Palace. And I thought the Ice Palace would be such a nice, cool name for the room because it was such a hot box. The heat would pour down on it all the time. So it became the Ice Palace. Now, the one problem I had in the Ice Palace was day trippers. You'd have ferry boats filled with straight people coming in, and you couldn't wait for the last boat, so they would all leave, so you could have the room to yourself. And I swore, one day I'm going to open up a club, and it's going to be a private club, so only my friends can be. So that's the reason why Flamingo became such a private club. And because of its being a private club, and it was full, and no more people could get into it, it became the place to try to get into. So the rumor had that the membership on the black market had gone to $500 or $600 for a membership and things of that nature. But the truth of the matter is Flamingo did have, at that time, the cream of the crop in the gay world. The architects, the artists, the painters, the designers, and of course the hottest men in town all were in Flamingo. That was basically a prerequisite. Besides being a friend of mine, if you were fabulous, you did get a membership. But eventually, of course, I had to eliminate the members down to the 1,175 that we eventually got. And that was it.
So I read Dancer from the Dance when I was in college, and I was completely, it just sort of propelled me into my life in New York in a way. But I know that it ends on the opening night of Flamingo. Just describe that world to me. What was it about?
Oh, I don't know. It was such.
I mean, did it feel like this is something new and different, and we're creating a way of living that's no one's ever?
It didn't feel that way in the beginning, and it took me quite a few years before I realized that we had. But in the beginning, it was just a matter of trying to create an environment for my friends. A place that I wanted to go to. I just enjoyed the aspect of it. After spending 12 years on Broadway, this was like Broadway to me. It was just opening up, and every week it became.
I'm sorry, we've got a fire truck.
Oh.
It's a very good point you're making.
Can you do me a favor and cross your legs the other direction so your body's not facing away? Yeah, you're facing Jeff a little bit more.
Yeah.
This way?
Not that
Yeah,
far.
it's just a little bit better for the image, yeah.
We might want to try to incorporate the question a little bit more. I really briefed him on that.
Oh, okay. Yeah, when I ask you the question, if you can reiterate my question and your answer.
Jeff's not going to be heard.
I'm not going to be heard on.
Oh, I
on
see.
Piece, so if I say, what was the greatest night at Flamingo, you'd say the greatest night at Flamingo
Was the closing night.
It's funny. I think that's the way to say it.
I wasn't a member there.
Can I just move this back?
You were a member?
No, I wasn't a member, but I went all the time.
Oh.
Great.
Well, then you must have had a friend that got you in.
I did. After a while, they knew me at the door.
Oh, so they let you in.
Yeah.
They just assumed. Because all the members had numbers, and so the number was written down on a piece of paper. So you wanted to know what was the greatest night at Flamingo and how?
No. I was just saying if you could reiterate my question, your answer.
Yeah.
You were. I was asking you about this lifestyle that sort of came into being in the early '70s, and were you aware? You were comparing it to the theater.
Yes, I thought that Flamingo was like the theater, or every opening night on Broadway is like opening night at a nightclub, especially if you spend as much time decorating it as much as I did. I was fortunate because I had a whole 10,000 square feet of empty space in my building above us, which I used for prop building. And every Monday morning we'd start tearing down, and every Wednesday or so we'd start building it. And so along came the White Party, which was in 1974, and that was such a fabulous success. We decided, well, let's do a Red Party. And then let's do the Tropicana Party. And then all of a sudden someone said, well, why don't we do a Black Party and have everyone in leather and stuff.
So wait, what was a White Party? What was the idea?
The idea of the White Party was the music. The music had to be very much like that soft, not heavy music. It was also the winter, and everyone had to wear white. And the decorations were totally white. And the event was always held on George Washington's birthday. That's when we had the president. We didn't have President's Day. We had George Washington, then we had Abraham Lincoln another day. So that's how that all came about. And it came about because I wanted something to do with the club. I wanted the club to have a function besides walking into the same space every week. I wanted the club, you walk in and wow, it's different. And that was my goal every week, to be able to change it. So the club never looked the same, the lighting was never the same. And at the same time, we had to create a lot of the effects. That you couldn't go out and rent a special effect. There was no such thing as special effects. What you found that was already done was just lamps that you could rent. But I was fortunate enough to have Frankie Montegudu, who had spent his earlier years working at Disney down in Florida. And so he had a great knowledge of electrical technology. And so he would build things, and we would sit down on the dance floor and we would create things that we'd stick up on the ceiling, and also dealing with the main lounge, being able to tear it apart and rebuild it and create an environment and an atmosphere. So that's how the White Party came about, was the idea that every week I wanted to change it. Every week I wasn't successful at it, but a few of them survived, like the White Party survived to this day, and the Black Party has survived to this day because of the image that we created. Those two parties lasted from year to year. And every year it got more involved, and of course a lot more thought went into it and planning went into it. And then you found out you had a whole battery of people who were working at this thing, including bringing in carpenters and building sets. So the party came about because of as far as I was concerned, the need to have a different appearance every time you walked into the club.
So the Black Party, what was your idea behind it? How did you sort of conceive of it?
Well, the Black Party came about basically because there was a couple of leather bars in town that I thought were very hot. And so what I tried to do is kind of copy the leather bar and turn Flamingo into what a leather bar should look like, and bring in all the possibilities, all the fantasies into the club on that particular night.
Just 1 second, Michael. Your shoes are kind of squeaking. You can either take them off, or do you mind?
You'll be more comfortable anyway.
Yeah, you'll be more comfortable that way. But they're just kind of. We don't want to hear the squeaking when you're making some point, about the Black Party.
They were squeaking, weren't they? I could hear them myself. I didn't realize that.
Okay.
Okay.
So, how is the Flamingo different than discos that had come before? Because so many people I talk to tell me like the Flamingo was it. It's where everything really came together.
There hadn't been a club like it before. There had not been clubs. There have been beautiful straight clubs, but there was never a gay club like Flamingo. It was in its size, in its attitude. And the fact that when you went to Flamingo, you felt like you were a personality. When you walked into Flamingo, you knew people, and people knew you. The staff knew you. The staff became very friendly with the membership. And when you find that you're comfortable in a place, you can be more creative yourself, and you can be more outgoing. And because of that kind of rapport that the membership had together, you created a whole society that overflowed out of the club and into your personal life. You dealt with people outside the club on a personal level, and you made friends with, and it became a society within itself, all through the city.
It's interesting because Stonewall happened, and there was like this liberation for gays, but very quickly it sounds like there was like different tribes of gays in New York. I mean, there was the guys who went to the Anvil and the Mine Shaft, and the other clubs. They were very partisan to which area of town they lived in, and the Flamingo was the A-list guys, the Pines guys, the elite.
Flamingo had a reputation of being the A-list, yes, that's for sure. And I enjoyed keeping it that way. To go to Flamingo was a very special event for a lot of people. And to be a member, of course, was something very special.
But did you ever look out over the sea of men with their shirts off and the bodies and everything else and think, 10 years ago it was boys in the band?
When I stood up in the DJ booth and looked out over that what I could call sea of humanity that was pulsating down on the dance floor, I was always quite taken back. I looked at it and was overwhelmed by the energy. And I used to say, God, if you could bottle this, the energy that came off the dance floor was incredible. And the perspiration, the smell of bodies coming up from the dance floor into your nostrils. You go, let me get out of here. This is too hot for me. And split. The DJ booth was a place where I very seldom allowed anybody in. And because I felt that the DJ needed to concentrate on what he was doing. And in the previous clubs, the DJ booth would be open to the public. And the DJ's friends would come marching through and marching. But I said, no, this is impossible. You cannot do that. In this booth, you're working for an audience. And one little mistake, and you can destroy 1,000 people's evening. So no visitors in the DJ booth.
The music was changing. How did the music change over the course of the time?
The music changed. The people like Casablanca Records, for instance, they contributed a great deal to the change of the music. They brought in Sylvester and all the songs that Sylvester sang, and Donna Summers. And our DJs like Howard Merritt or Richie Rivera worked with these companies in the studio and mixed the music. I don't think there's any major Donna Summers hit that wasn't mixed by Howard Merritt. And Howard would bring the music in along with the executives from the company. If the song or the record hit that night, they'd stay there and they'd watch the crowd. If it made it, they would go back and it became a bullet, as they would say. If it didn't, it was thrown out. If it didn't pass inspection on the dance floor at Flamingo, it didn't make it. It wasn't recorded. But on Monday morning, if it was a hit, it would be recorded, and within 3 or 4 weeks, maybe the world heard about it. But at Flamingo, we always had the music first, no matter whose music was.
So gay men played a huge role in the disco explosion.
Gay men played a tremendous role in developing the disco music of the 70s. That all that music that you hear today was all developed in the gay discos of that time.
What about this sort of how DJs played music throughout the night? It was a journey that you went on. Did that start at Flamingo?
Yeah, the journey that is done by DJs, it was all created, I think, by people like Frankie Montagudo, who did the lights, but it happened with Armando Galvez. I was fortunate enough to know Armando, and he encouraged me to get into the club business, and especially Flamingo. He was a great encouragement with that. He always said that you have to take the dancer and give him a show. And he said you have to start the evening off and you have to build to a crescendo. And then let them down a little bit and then build it back up and let them down. And then at finally at the evening, you have to give them music so that you can bring them down and send them away for the evening. But unfortunately, Armando's no longer with us, but he created that evening, and everyone sort of copied that idea. You just couldn't play one song after another without it being in line. It was almost like choreography. When you have a choreographer who puts one step after the other, in music you have to put one piece of music after the other that will build upon it, and you'll build to a point where you can have that dance floor screaming at the top of its head, and then you bring them down gently and let them go home.
So, in 1979, was Flamingo at the top of its game?
In 1979, yes, Flamingo was secure. I was secure that I had done my job in creating this place. And at 1979 is when we had the major attention by the record companies, by the public. I tried desperately to keep Flamingo's name out of the press. But in 1979, we had people coming in that I would never expect. And like Diana Ross showed up with an entourage one night. And someone came to me, one of my floor people came, Diana Ross wants to go in the DJ booth. And I said, what? She says, Diana Ross, she wants to go in the DJ booth. I said, wow, I didn't know she was here. So I ran out, and I ran up to the DJ booth, and it was Richie Rivera. And I said, Richie, Diana Ross is here. She wants to come up to the booth. He says, Yes, I know. I just spent the afternoon in the studio with her mixing her song. And I said, oh, so you have it? He said, yes, I got it right here. I said, oh, do you mind if she comes up? No. So she goes up there and she sings to the song. And Richie just blends it in because he's kind of like got this in the back of his mind. He never told me that she was going to show up. Maybe she would and maybe she wouldn't. But she got up there and she performed to that floor because the DJ booth is way up. She performed to that floor and everyone was stunned because there was no introduction to it. It just, her song just flowed into the music that was already playing. And she just laid them right out. Everyone was like freaking out. I mean, they're on window pane and there's Diana Ross. And the Flamingo, you knew it's the real Diana Ross because we didn't fool around. We gave you the real stuff. We didn't give you any drag queen or anything like that. But that was the kind of intensity that Flamingo had developed by 1979.
What was the name of the song she sang?
Let me see. Diana Ross, and that year, let's see, what was the name of that song? I'm trying to write it down here, say the name of that.
Coming Out, maybe?
She did No Mountain High Enough in 1970.
Love Hangover?
Love Hangover, though, but that's in the 70s. Around 79, with Richie Rivera was playing, I think it was Once in the Morning, was the song that she sang then, Once in the Morning.
Okay, so the Flamingo is flying high, it's 1979. Then the summer comes and people are talking about a new club. Do you remember when you first heard the...
Yes. When the season ends, the season ended would be around Memorial Day or a week before Memorial Day, and I'd have buses out in the street, and people would go off to Fire Island. And at Fire Island, I heard, and we would close for the summer, reopen in September, but we were closed in summer. So I was out at Fire Island in 1979, the summer of 79, or the summer of 80. And a friend of mine, Andres Landa, who's a photographer, said, Michael, there's going to be a big club opening in this year. I said, yeah. He says, it's going to be major. I said, oh, really? What should I do about it? He says, well, what do you want me to do about it? I said, well, I don't know. There's, Studio 54 opened and didn't bother us. Why should another club, Because when Studio 54 opened, Steve wanted to make it gay. So it lasted gay for 3 weeks. And then Steve loved all that money. So he couldn't help himself. And so it didn't become gay. But then I learned that there was going to be...
Hold on one sec. Oops. Maybe I'll stop. Sometimes he's...
Random.
This is so great. Okay.
So that in the summertime, while we were on vacation, I heard that there was going to be a major club opening, and it was going to be on 2nd Avenue in the old Fillmore East Theater. And I remember the old Fillmore East Theater because of seeing quite a few big names there. And I thought, wow, that's going to be huge. But I paid no attention to it. I figured that, well, it's just a club. A big club like that, they're probably going to land up by going straight like Studio 54 did. But they kept talking about it and talking about it. But in my head, I just felt it really would never bother us at Flamingo until it opened. Until I looked at it. Then I said, holy Christ, we're in trouble. But it was a blessing in disguise because after 7 years of running Flamingo, I was fairly well exhausted from the production of Flamingo. When you're in a Broadway show for 7 years, you're kind of like worn out. So I felt I was really kind of tired out anyhow. I've done everything I possibly could do. I've turned this place into a million different evenings. And so maybe it was a blessing at the time. I really didn't feel like like closing Flamingo because it was a wonderful lifestyle and I enjoyed it so much. But at the same time, maybe it was a blessing that the Saint did open. Otherwise, I'd still be struggling along trying to make a cow sow into a silk purse. Because let's face it, Flamingo was 10,000 square feet, and it had its limitations. At the time when it opened, it was the most spectacular, biggest club that ever did open. But in comparison, after 7 years later, when the Saint opened, my God, it was like the Rose Bowl. The Saint was so spectacular.
Tell me about the first night you went, just like what was going through your head when you
when I first walked into the Saint, everything was envy. I walked in there and I said, look at this coat room, because a coat room in a club is a nightmare. And this coat room was wonderful. My God, they can actually check 6,000 coats, and they do it so fast. Oh, God. So that was my immediate reaction to it. And the rest of the evening was contributed with a combination of awe and envy. And I walked up to the dance floor and I saw this incredible dome and the lighting system. Wow, that was something. So I guess Flamingo had to close. But we struggled along for a couple of months, and I closed the Flamingo on the White Party. And that was the biggest party that Flamingo had ever seen. And if anyone were to ask me what was the greatest party of Flamingo, I would say the closing party.
Tell me about it.
Well, everyone showed up. Your ex-lovers showed up. The most gorgeous men in the world showed up. It was the night when we packed the place so severely that you couldn't possibly move in it.
Hold on one sec. Are we rolling on? Yeah. Okay, we're gonna change tapes.
Okay, Jeff.
So Steve's question was about how you were a personality at Flamingo, but at the same time, everyone wanted to be the same person in a way.
Well, some people say that the membership became like clones. They all looked alike. I think the truth of the matter is that when you abandon your slacks for Levi's and leather jacket and boots, you have a tendency to all look alike. The clone aspect of it really was something I think that developed over a period of time. I wouldn't want to call the Flamingo members clones because there's still many of them around that would chase me down the street. But nevertheless, I think it was a desire to fit in maybe, if you didn't fit in. Because there were the leaders and then there were the followers. And most of those followers eventually became leaders themselves. The aspect of looking down at the dance floor from, like, say, the DJ booth, when you're thinking about the energy that emanates from them, you can't really think of them as clones in that sense, but probably some people did.
But there was a new sort of ideal, there was a gay ideal that came about in the 70s where it was sort of like, we can be the Marlboro Man, we can be...
Everyone at Flamingo thought they were the Marble Man. I want to tell you, then they were too. The idea that you were the hottest man going in your neighborhood because you had a Flamingo membership probably did pull some strings around it. But the membership itself was, like I say, it was a society that grew out from the club into every part of your lifestyle.
Did that aspect of gay life, this sort of worship of the masculinity, did that intensify at the Saint, do you think?
I think it started at Flamingo. And it intensified more at the Saint because the Saint was able to develop a bigger crowd. I could put 1,500 people at Flamingo, and the Saint probably did more like 4,500 or 5,000. So I think at the Saint you got a larger energy force, and you got that clone thing probably sort of emanated more there, and grew out from the 7 years that they were running. And the Saint still probably is doing the same thing now, 30 years later, with those wonderful parties at the Roseland, which I haven't gone to in the last 10 years, but then I don't go dancing any longer.
You were an actor and a Broadway actor aficionado. I keep having this thought about how gay men in the 40s and 50s, they'd go to see musicals and they would sort of, it would be this, they would have this vicarious experience through these two straight characters on stage. And as we know, that musical theater means so much to gay men, but it's like you get to a place like Flamingo and the Saint, and suddenly it's a musical theater. They're the actors, like it's really them.
Yes, I believe that the average gay man feels like his life might be a Broadway musical, and I believe that the Broadway musical is a big part of a lot of gay men's lives. It certainly was a big part of my life. But you do have a tendency to live your life like it's a Broadway musical. I've lived all these years thinking that that the curtain will eventually come down, but nevertheless, you're talking about Broadway musicals. I think that the gay population in the country has supported the theaters so completely that in a lot of cases that the stage has really lasted through its hardships because of the gay community.
I'm just saying, there's one thing to go to a musical and emote by sort of watching something that's happening on stage, and it's another person's life. But discos enabled gay men to like enter this musical theater world, but it was like they were the stars.
Yeah. When you yes, I suppose you could say that when some guys go into a club, they do become a star, like a Broadway star. You could possibly say that. I don't know. That's a kind of an interesting situation. Yes, I believe you're right that the gay individual, when left to his own devices, probably can take on the fantasies of being on stage. And heaven knows, dancing on the Flamingo dance floor or the Saints dance floor, you became a star.
It was theater.
It was theater. It was definitely theater. Yeah. Anyhow.
But talking about you're talking about the clones and how you also were a personality, because this was like your place when you went to these discos. You felt at home at last. There was another side of it where you lost your ego and you became part of a tribe, and that was a very powerful thing for the men who went there, is like to find a world that was reflected who they were and also who they wanted to be. Could you comment on the sort of tribal aspect of the experience these guys had at the Flamingo and the Saint? Did you ever have anyone say like, wow, this is like a very primitive thing that we're doing here, it's tribal, it's you subsume your ego and you dance all night long and you sort of like go into this other...
Well, I do know that on many occasions the parties, especially like the Black Party, it became like a tribal experience. You really felt that what was going on in the dance floor was that like some ancient ritual that probably was brought out by some sexual desires that became part of the dance itself. I don't know. It was an interesting situation to watch, that's for sure, especially from where I was standing.
So if we could just go back to when the Saint opened, and you said you went and you were like, oh my God, you were on and you felt some envy, but what did people say to you? Like, they must have been kind of like, oh, how do we say this to Michael? Like, this place is awesome.
Yes, it was when the Saint opened. My friends were, treating me like I was going to die any minute because they felt sorry for me. we had wonderful writers. Felice Bacano wrote a wonderful story about Flamingo's closing, and a few other writers did the same thing. And in most cases, the general public realized that it's time to move on, from one club to another. So when the Saint opened, it was just another step for the gay community. Basically, that same crowd moved right over to the Saint without losing a breath. Went right on. Do you have some water?
Yes.
I'm getting very dry.
Is there any up here? I'll get some.
I don't think we have a fresh.
Yes.
Sorry.
Is there one?
There's some cold water or just regular water? Yeah, that's not too cold.
That's all right. I was just
I'll
getting
ask a few
some.
more questions. Do you think that the 1970s was like an adolescence for the gay world, gay community?
The 1970s, an adolescence for the gay community. Well, an adolescence, that means that they were all teenagers at heart, right? I suppose in some aspect you might say they're adolescents, and they grew a great deal during the 1970s and into the 1980s, when they had to deal with AIDS, because that destroyed everyone's life in a sense. But it was much more carefree and relaxed during the gay sexual revolution, I guess, of the 70s. I suppose some were adolescent, I would say.
Back to the Saint, I just want to ask you a few more questions. You went to the Saint. Did you know who Bruce Mailman was? Were you wondering, like, where did this guy come up with this idea? Or
Oh, I know where he came up with the idea. He was at Flamingo all the time. Bruce Mailman used to be a member, or I don't think he was a member of Flamingo. But he came to Flamingo. And yes, and I knew who Bruce Mailman was because he had a bathhouse that practically anyone left over at Flamingo at 8 or 9 o'clock in the morning went over to the St. Mark's Baths, and it was a continuation of the society. Like I said, when that social group left Flamingo, they knew each other, and they knew each other at the St. Mark's Baths. So Sunday afternoon at St. Mark's Baths was like a gathering place, and that's where you exchange information about what happened the night before. Who did you dance with? Who did you go to bed with? Who did you take out? The Rock Hudsons went home with Rock Hudsons. The Marjorie Mains went home with the Marjorie Mains, as far as that. But the Saint was the place to be on a Sunday afternoon. It was pre-tea dance, actually.
I'm sorry, the baths?
The St. Mark's Baths. Yeah. And I suppose that's where the Saint got his name, from the St. Mark's Baths. But the St. Mark's Baths was a fabulous social event. I spent many an Sunday afternoon unwinding at the Saint Baths.
So, who was Bruce Mailman? What kind of person was these places?
I can say that I knew who Bruce Mailman was, but I don't think I ever really met him. I think Bruce Mailman probably just, because of the pressure of running a big bathhouse and then a big club like he owned and ran, he learned very quickly that you had to stay away from the public to kind of like create anonymity. Because the public is so demanding on you. They want attention from you constantly, and one of the things that I found hard to deal with was the people asking, "Oh, can I have this? Can you do this for me? Can you do that for me?" And I suppose in Bruce Mailman's position, he even had it more severe than I did, and I believe that he probably found a way to maintain his anonymity behind, shut that curtain, shut that door, and stay away from it. When it's like, I always felt that when the doors open to your club, your job is basically over. You've done everything you possibly can to. You've decorated it, you've brought the flowers in, you've brought the DJs in, you've got the light people, you've done it all. And so when that door opens, my job is over. There's nothing more I can do. I never go to a DJ booth and tell him what to play. That would be the last thing in the world to do. And so what else is there to do? I could go home, frankly.
Did you think he was like a genius, or?
No, I didn't think Bruce Mailman was a genius. I just thought it was a natural progression, you know, to see what was happening and see what our culture, the gay culture, wanted and what the gay culture was doing. So it was a natural thing for someone who had the knowledge and the capacity to build something like the Saint, because he could see that the public wanted it. And Flamingo, he could also see that Flamingo had it 7 years and it was time to move on. And you certainly wanted to move on into another a step above, or several steps above, which the Saint became. And you wanted a place where you could accommodate more people, because the Flamingo could only accommodate 1,500. So I think that Bruce Mailman did the great service to the gay community in the 1980s. As did Steve Verbel with Studio 54. I mean, they both created great clubs.
Steve, do you have any questions?
What about the fact that when AIDS first came on the scene, it was called the Saints disease? Do you remember when it was, when you first heard about AIDS, and it was tied so closely with that group that it started at the Flamingo and then graduated to the Saint, having come from Fire Island?
Now that you've mentioned it, I do recall that it was, for a moment in time, called the Saint Mark's Baz Saint disease, or the Saint disease. But that might have been just a kind of a riffraff kind of attitude that some people had, like I said, in a moment of time. It was very clear and very quickly known that the AIDS had spread internationally and very, very quickly. It was a disaster for everyone. Psychological disaster, artistic disaster. We lost a generation of giants in that period of time. You lost your artists and your architects, your painters and your designers and your choreographers and dancers and singers. And to think back in that period of time, it's like a plague. It was a total plague on everyone's psyche. To say that it was at one time called the Saint's disease, I think it was just a moment. And of course, the Saint had to take the blame for it by some people because of the St. Mark's Baz thing.
What does it say about us as gay men that we love to dance together till dawn?
Well, to dance together with a bunch of people that you know till dawn it takes a lot of energy to begin with. And when you're young and you want to go out dancing, you think nothing of spending the night dancing. Some guys, can spend the Saturday night home reading a book, and some guys can't. So you have to find your home away from home. And clubs like Flamingo, the Saint, or Studio 54, which never, by the way, stayed open till 4 o'clock, 6 o'clock. Those were your home away from home.
And what about the impact of drugs on that group of people, and the change in drug and the introduction of drugs into the dance culture? How did that impact your club, the Saint, Fire Island, the lifestyle?
I think the impact of drugs in the club scene dates back to about, I think, the flower child syndrome of the 60s. And that's when the drugs were softer drugs. They were like soft window pane drugs, things of that nature. And they grew into being more available to those who were going out dancing, and drugs were very, very important to the evening of what the club you were going to. I remember a DJ once saying to me, "I have to know what the guys are taking tonight so that I can play the music that they want to hear, because depending on what kind of drugs you were on is the kind of music the DJ would be playing." Which was quite a chore and quite a feat for everyone in town to land onto the same drug. Drugs would come pouring in from wherever, and one person would get on the phone and call another person saying, "Tonight, so-and-so's got this and so-and-so's got that." And the drug world just kept growing and growing. And I believe it started in the 60s. And when the big clubs opened, of course, because everyone knew each other, then the drug scene, of course, just grew with it. I don't think that anybody really spent the whole evening sober. Maybe, but I doubt it.
It's not easy.
Not easy.
I tried it. I was like, no, thank you.
How can you dance for 8 or 10 hours straight without some kind of stimulants? And since we didn't serve alcohol, we serve bananas for potassium reasons. I felt it was very important to keep up your potassium. So there was always piles of bananas around.